By the grace of Allah, I, Auda Abu Tai, warn you to quit Arabia before the end of Ramadan. We Arabs want this country for ourselves. Unless this is done by the beard of the Prophet, I declare you proscribed, outlawed, and fair game for anyone to kill. These are the words of Sheikh Auda Abu Tai, spoken in the holy city of Mecca in June 1916, and directed at the Sultan of Turkey in Istanbul. So began the Arab revolt, led by Emir Faisal of Mecca, himself a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. The revolt was welcomed by the British and French, who were themselves engaged in fighting Germany's ally Turkey at that stage of the Great War. 1 year and 1 month after the proclamation in Mecca, the Red Sea port of Aqaba fell to an Arab army led by Auda Abu Tai, Ali ibn Hussein, and a young British Army captain, T.E.Lawrence. The taking of Aqaba was a pivotal victory of the campaign. For the Arabs, it meant the opening of a supply line that would enable them to sweep north, take Damascus, and bring an end to nearly 600 years of Ottoman Turkish rule. The result would be the creation of a single Arab nation-state encompassing all Syria and Arabia. The British and French, however, had other ideas. The fall of Aqaba secured the British right flank, and the Arab campaign east of the Jordan River would pin down Turkish forces, while the main thrust through Palestine would enable the Allies to take Damascus and divide Syria, Palestine, and Transjordan between them. There's no doubt that the young Captain Lawrence played a key role in the Aqaba offensive, although his claim to have masterminded and led the attack must be doubted. He may have been entirely in sympathy with the aspirations of the Arabs, but he was certainly aware of the importance of securing the British right flank. Whatever the truth of the matter, Lawrence succeeded in creating for himself a legend in his own time. As Lawrence of Arabia, this strange and enigmatic man secured his place in history. At the time of the Arab revolt, the vital supply line to the Turkish forces in Medina was the Hejaz Railway, a pilgrim route running over 1,000 miles due south from Damascus, across the Arabian desert. This remote railway line was really the backbone of the Turkish Empire, and figured largely in Lawrence's strategy. In order to take Aqaba, the Arabs had to make a 600-mile encircling movement east of the railway, crossing the pitiless Nefud Desert to reach the oasis of Azraq. The journey took 12 days by camel, while today it's just a few hours along the concrete highway to Baghdad. It remains, however, a journey across one of the most desolate places on the planet. The ancient fortress of Azraq was built in the 13th century, but on the site of a much older construction dating from 300 AD. We've come here to meet the keeper. He's the son of one of Lawrence's officers, Qasim Assad.
This is Romano, Imperator Maximilian. Julio. This Latin, Emperor Julio. Roman game this is. 1917 Mr. Lawrence. Kunj Faisal, Mr. Lawrence, Arab Legion, Turkestan, finish.
The picture Lawrence?
All the pictures, including his father.
This Lawrence.
I'll hold them down, that's it. That's nice.
Yeah.
So he
and
can...
this Lawrence Aqaba. Just a minute. This Aqaba. And this Wadi Ram between. And Abuera Ma'an. And this Lawrence. This
Father.
And your father.
Oh, father.
Your friend
Qasim Assad.
And the name Qasim Assad. Alusi.
Mr. Lawrence.
This in the picture, Lawrence.
This
This is you.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Both Jerryman. Both Jerryman.
Young.
When he was young.
Both Jerryman. Sleep.
And your
Come on.
wife.
We sleep, Mr. Lawrence.
Lawrence.
Kun Faisal, father.
Ah.
Oh, father.
The castle of Azraq, Lawrence's desert headquarters during the winter of 1917, is now something of a shrine to these great Arab patriots, and Ilman is very proud of his personal connection.
Welcome in Jordan. And
From Azraq, the final phase of the circling movement brought the Arab Legion to the Circassian village of Zirka, north of Amman. Lawrence intended to attack the Hejaz Railway here, but floods had washed away 4 of the arches and the track was laid on a temporary diversion. The attack was abandoned, and the Arab force moved north again to Minifir, just below Mafraq. We went to Mafraq itself to look at something of the Turkish legacy. Here today, at the old Turkish railway station, the international train from Damascus is arriving, just as it did in the days of the Ottoman Empire. This diminutive and rather shabby train only runs once a week and goes no further south than Amman. It attracts few passengers, and one thing's for sure, none of them are pilgrims on their way to Mecca. There doesn't seem to be any trace of what Lawrence himself called Minifir Halt, but it was somewhere around here in June 1917 that the line was mined, stopping all traffic for 3 days. Lawrence and Ali ibn Hussein came back 4 months later for another go. This time it went rather badly. They had only 60 yards of detonator wire, so Lawrence couldn't get very far back from the point of explosion. When the slow-moving train reached the charge, Lawrence plunged the detonator, but nothing happened. The train crawled by, with Lawrence in full view of the Turkish soldiers riding the train. He described the scene in the 7 Pillars of Wisdom. So I sat there, counting for sheer life, while 18 open trucks, 3 box wagons, and 3 officers' coaches dragged by. No doubt he was taken for a rather curiously attired Bedouin shepherd, and so escaped what would have been certain death. The final stage of the huge sweep to take Aqaba was the move south along the Hejaz railway line, raiding as they went. The Turks had a substantial garrison at Abu Lisan on the heights of the Jebel Batra. From here they commanded the northern approaches to the vast Arabian plateau. The Arabs attacked and defeated the Turkish army here at this vital strategic position, and this enabled them to move down onto the desert floor to Gawira, which fell without a fight. At the far side of this majestic desertscape is the stupendous gorge of Wadi Itum, and a 20-mile descent through the mountains to Aqaba and the sea. The Turks didn't think that Aqaba could be taken from the hinterland, and once Abu Lisan and Gawira had fallen, there was little in the way of Turkish defences to protect the rear of the town. The last stage of the battle for Aqaba took place in the gorge itself, where Turkish artillery was outflanked. The road to the sea was open. The Arab Legion entered Aqaba on the 6th of July, 1917. This was the ancient port of King Solomon, whose fleet once rode at anchor in the Gulf. Later, Phoenician galleys and Roman triremes plied these waters. Over the centuries which followed, Aqaba lost its importance, and by the time Lawrence arrived here, was nothing more than a few shabby huts and an old Mameluke fort. The Prophet Muhammad preached many of his first sermons here in Aqaba, which lays approximately midway between the two holiest cities in all Islam, Mecca and Jerusalem. There was virtually no food in Aqaba, and with 700 prisoners to feed, as well as their own men, the Arabs faced a crisis. The date palms were laden with green dates, which, according to Lawrence, tasted nasty even when cooked. They had to resort to killing and eating some of their precious riding camels. The town of Aqaba, roused from its centuries-long slumber, now became a focal point in the campaign to rid Arabia of the Ottoman Turk. With its refound importance came all the trappings of a major supply port. Even the Turks started to trade there, surreptitiously, but with Lawrence's unspoken compliance. They desperately needed Manchester cotton, and traders were allowed to pass through the lines to buy this commodity in Aqaba. It suited both sides well enough, but Lawrence turned it to particular advantage. Not only was the trade a source of Syrian and Turkish gold, but the propaganda possibilities were endless. Some of the traders were spying for the Turkish authorities, but were often turned to become spies for the Arab cause instead. German military equipment was another much sought-after commodity, which found its way into the town, especially the highly prized field glasses. The British, remembering well their unfortunate experiences in India, supplied the Arab fighters with German rifles made of nickel steel, which required no grease. The standard British Enfield rifles were lubricated with pork grease, a substance that no Muslim would touch at any price. Of all the fighting Bedouin tribes, none was fiercer than the Hawitat. Their sheikh, Aouda, was a fearless warrior. He had false teeth made by a Turkish dentist, which, in a fit of rage, he willfully smashed on a rock. The result of this overzealous anti-Turkish demonstration was a 2-month-long diet of nothing but milk and boiled rice, until Lawrence had a new set especially made for him in Cairo. Married 28 times, Aouda had only one surviving son, Muhammad Abu Tayi, who was 11 years of age. All his many other sons had been killed in tribal raids or blood feuds. General Allenby was to say of Lawrence that he had made train wrecking a national sport in Arabia. There's no doubt that Lawrence, previously a mild-mannered archaeologist, had become a devoted and expert demolitionist. He got a real thrill out of train wrecking and freely admitted it. He liked to lay his own mines using 1 pound of gelignite to cause a derailment and between 40 and 50 pounds to destroy a train. Lawrence realized that cutting the Hejaz railway line permanently would be a mistake. Once the Turkish supply line to Medina had been broken, the Turks would have pulled their army out of the Hejaz altogether, transferring it to the main battlefront in Palestine, where it would have presented a much greater threat. The Turks kept their garrison in Medina while thousands more men were pinned down protecting this long, overstretched supply line. There was an additional advantage. Each train they attacked provided both food and ammunition. Each of the remote stations along the line housed a small Turkish force, and each was the location of a well, essential for replenishing the tanks of the steam locomotives. These became targets for many of the raids, like the one at Tel el-Shahim, destroyed by 30 rounds of high explosives. Lawrence's main targets on the Hejaz Railway were, however, the thousands of small bridges and viaducts that spanned the shallow wadis. Charges were usually laid in the masonry arches and abutments, and when detonated, the spans collapsed and the locomotive and train plunged into the wadi. This would be the signal for a general attack on the hapless passengers, followed by the plunder of supplies and valuables. The Bedouin enjoyed these episodes and often yelped with joy. After the capture of Aqaba, the Arabs placed a force within the hidden city of Petra, high in the mountains near the Valley of Moses. The Turks sent troops to dislodge them, approaching the city from the east, down this dry wadi. They must have known that the wadi soon gives way to a deep and narrow gully called the Sik. The Arabs would use the same defense against this Turkish force as had the ancient Nabateans against Alexander the Great 300 years before Christ. The narrow cleft of the Sik opens out suddenly to confront the treasury, the most fabulous of all Petra's constructions. The Bedouin called this the treasury, El Kazni, because they believed the stone urn high above the colonnade contained the gold and jewels of the pharaohs of Egypt. Lawrence thought it more probably a temple to the goddess Isis. This magnificent secret city was built by the Nabateans, who cut these huge and perfectly proportioned facades and chambers from the solid sandstone. The great city was eventually abandoned and forgotten. Kept a well-guarded secret by the Bedouin, it did not re-emerge until discovered by the Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt at the beginning of the 19th century. The October 1917 Battle of Petra was unique in that Arab women became combatants for the first time in history. Under the leadership of Sheikh Khalil's wife, Lawrence placed these Bedouin women on the treasury before allowing the Turks to push more than 1,000 fighting men into the narrow Sik. A rocket was fired as a signal, and the Turks were caught in withering fire from which there was no escape. More Bedouin women, accompanied by children, pushed rocks down onto the trapped Turkish soldiers hundreds of feet below. By the end of the day, the Arabs had killed or captured the entire Turkish force, whilst losing only 28 killed or wounded. On the 13th of September 1917, Lawrence and the Bedouin tribes gathered at Wadi Rum. This is probably the most famous and familiar location in the entire Arabian desert, and was the setting for much of David Lean's epic film Lawrence of Arabia. From here, the Arab army moved eastward to attack the Hejaz railway line at Madwara, an important Turkish stronghold and today the most southerly settlement in Jordan. Like the Arab force of 1917, we began this stage of the journey by camel. The Arabian camel is called a dromedary, which is derived from the Greek meaning a camel that runs. These single-humped beasts live to an age of about 25, but are in their prime between the ages of 4 and 14. The journey from Wadi Rum to Madwara is no more than 50 miles, an easy day's march for a camel, which might manage up to 110 miles per day at a push. The desert wells are seldom more than 100 miles apart, and even in the heat of summer, when the temperature can exceed 45 degrees, these animals can do 250 miles between drinks. The Bedouin train their camels not to whine, and a whole caravan can pass within 20 yards of a tent without being heard. We finally reached the Hejaz railway line south of the village of Madwara, very close to the Saudi border. We were looking for the exact location of one of Lawrence's most famous train wrecks, near kilometre post 587. This shallow bridge seemed to be the location, but there was no real evidence visible, and of course the kilometre posts disappeared long ago. It was a real disappointment, as we'd been told that the remains of the wreck still lay in the sand. The assistance of the headmaster of the Bedouin school in Madwara, accompanied by 2 of his teachers, finally led us to the actual location, rather closer to the somewhat ill-defined Saudi border than we had realized, or would have dared approach without guides. Non-Muslim visitors are not overly welcome in Saudi Arabia. Here it is, the wreck, laying just where it had fallen when Lawrence detonated his gelignite charge on the 17th of December 1917, nearly 80 years ago.
This is the gun driver. They shoot شو رصاص
bullet shoot بدون
they shoot from that mountains.
shoots fire from that mountains.
The train actually consisted of 10 wagons drawn by 2 locomotives, but this is all that remains. They say that the rest of it has been carried off, bit by bit, over the years.
Shoot. They shoot from that mountains. عودي أبو تايه and عايد العطني and زعل أبو تايه and Lawrence was with him in 1970. Yes.
So first they laid the charge, dynamited the train.
Yes.
When the train was blown off the line, they then opened fire.
Yes. بقول لك صار تفجير أول شيء في الديناميت وبعدين صار إطلاق رصاص.
Dynamite by here by شو اسمه؟
By the bridge.
جسر. بريدج.
Yeah.
Bridge.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He put it, but not train not fell down.
No.
Yes.
No. The train ran along here, derailed, and then toppled over.
Yes.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
We walked back from the wreck to the bridge where Lawrence exploded the charge, but the conversation turned to the more general question of the Arab revolt, its outcome and its long-term results.
شو معنى mistake؟ أبو سألني سؤال أنا ما فهمت المعنى. I did not understand what he mean. Ask him.
I asked.
Yes.
We were talking about the Turks having ruled here the whole of the Hejaz for 600 years, and then in the First World War, the Arab revolt, and the British and the French who cheated. They did, really. They cheated. And so, what the Arabs hoped for with the revolt never really happened. And I ask, do you think it was a mistake from the Arab point of view to kick the Turks out? Or was it better when the Turks were here?
أيوة.
That's what I was asking.
يعني العرب وقفوا مع الإنجليز والفرنسيين في المعركة. إحنا كنا نأمل شيء. إحنا كنا نأمل شيء. هل يعني
one country, one Arab to one country.
And you didn't get it?
No.
Yes.
Yes. Like this.
Sykes-Picot, yes.
Syria and Lebanon to France. Jordan and Palestinian for Britannia. It's very bad. Very bad. Our country fought, and Arabia Saudi to Abdulaziz Al-Awar.
بيشيلوها.
عبد العزيز آل سعود.
Yeah.
Yemen, two.
Two Yemens.
We are now to thinking why we are Arab 25 country to 25 king or
President or
yes,
Rulers, emirs, whatever.
25 flag 25 عاصمة شو؟
army, 25 capitals, 25.
It's very bad, very
Yes,
very very
we
bad.
want one Arab countries. We feel hopeless of British and France because people stand with them. And
This is the crux of the broken promise. The Turks were bad, but what the British did is considered unforgivable.
it's bad, but the English, what they done
What they
to us,
make to
that's
us.
more bad.
Worse.
Bad, yes,
Huh?
worse.
They take
We
They
feel
have-
hopeless of
from
that.
us, Palestinian to Israel, and they killed the men. And
Israel that British or Ingilterra or Britannia in Arabic stand with Israel, and they took Palestine. Palestine is very important for any Arabic and for any Islamic. So we feel hopeless,
Yes, I understand.
hopeless. Our grandfather and us and our son and our grandson until إلى آخر الزمان. At the end of this, we will feel hopeless.
But do you think that Lawrence himself knew that the British were going to cheat the Arabs?
هل بتعتقد إنه لورنس
This question led to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret deal done between Britain and France 1 month before the start of the Arab revolt. Its very existence meant there was never going to be a single Arab nation. But how much did Lawrence know of this?
he said that Lawrence is not a political man. He was an army man. What you mean?
But he made promises on behalf of the British.
Ah.
He made promises to Faisal, to Auda. He made
أعطى وعود.
promises,
أعطى وعود.
yes, yes, yes.
and these promises
Why
were
make them wrong?
broken.
Yes, أعطى وعود وهاي الوعود ما تنفذت. لورنس.
ربما كان الرجل نفسه مخدوع.
Maybe
مخدوع كخديعته.
Lawrence himself was cheat.
Cheated.
Yes. Or
Like the Arab.
like
Like
the
the
Arab.
Arab.
He don't know about anything. Maybe about like the Arab.
The politicians were doing deals in secret.
Yes.
Although Lawrence and the Arab Legion didn't exactly destroy the Hejaz Railway, it never really recovered from their attentions. All the more surprising, then, that we make this last stage of our journey back to Aqaba by train. Under the control of the Palestine Railways, a decision was made in 1922 to reopen the pilgrim line to Medina, and in June 1923 the first through train ran since the Turkish defeat. By 1924 a few trains were running, but the journey from Man to Medina was taking an incredible 12 days. The pilgrim traffic for which the line was constructed never really returned. Pilgrims to Mecca found other ways to go. Hardly surprising. And so this extraordinary railway fell into disuse until, in 1960, a German engineer was appointed to report on possible reconstruction. He estimated that the work would take 3 years at a cost of £10 million. Of the 575 miles between Man and Medina, 85% of the track was damaged. 30 miles of embankment were washed out, 10 miles of track was buried in sand, and all the stations were totally derelict. Work on the reconstruction did actually start, but by the early 1970s, interest evaporated and the project was abandoned. Just when it seemed that the railway which Lawrence had so famously wrecked was finally dead, there came a new project to divert the old Hejaz line to Aqaba, to carry phosphates from the mines at El Heza and Wadi Abiyad to the Red Sea port. This awesome engineering project would strike west from the old line at Batn el Ghul, crossing the desert plateau via Disi and Rum, before descending the mighty gorge of Wadi Itum, the very route which Lawrence had taken to defeat the Turks at Aqaba. So much for Lawrence the train wrecker, but as our journey ends, we can't help thinking that this strange and enigmatic figure from history remains as mysterious as ever. Did he really lead the Arab revolt as he claimed, or was he a consummate self-publicist? Although the Bedouin believed that under the Emir Faisal, men like Auda and Ali were the real leaders in the field, there's no doubt that Lawrence is still held in very high esteem. Did he really believe the promises he made on behalf of the British government? Was he even entitled to make such promises? The answer to both these questions seems to be no. The infamous Sykes-Picot agreement had already carved up the Middle East before Lawrence ever set foot in Arabia. The kindest conclusion is that Lawrence became so emotionally drawn into the Arab cause, so attached to the kinship of the Bedouin, and so engrossed in the excitement of the campaign, that he became for a time one of their own, a Meccan Sharif. We can only wonder why, having created his own legend and become one of the most celebrated heroes of his time, when it was all over, he simply walked away, changing his identity, seeking anonymity. Perhaps failure to realize the great dream of one Arab nation was as much his disappointment as theirs. In the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, he would write, "Names rang through my head, each in imagination a superlative. Rum the magnificent, Azrak the remote, Batra the very clean. Yet the men had changed. Death had taken the gentle ones, and the new stridency of those who were left hurt me."